These are the only foods you could legally buy in the United States that have a warning label on them that say, "Do not eat as is." That's because they were packaged by the government to be stored in fallout shelters during the Cold War, and they weren't exactly what you'd call food. They were more of a last resort. During the 1960s and 70s, the U.S. government distributed millions of these civil defense crackers, packaged in a wax paper and cardboard box that looked like this. Inside was a plastic bag with 12 individual packets of crackers inside, each one sealed with a peelable plastic top. And if you actually tried to eat them, well, you would quickly understand why this product has a warning label on it that says, "Do not eat as is." These crackers were dry, flavorless, and some people even said they had a slightly bitter taste, which could be caused by the plastic that the crackers were packaged in. They weren't exactly what you'd call edible, but people did their best to find ways to make them more palatable. One woman even wrote to Reader's Digest and shared her family's recipe for delicious mountain toast. First, you took the crackers and crushed them up into crumbs. Then you mixed in some sugar, flour, salt, milk, and eggs, and then you fried the mixture in a skillet until it was brown on both sides. The recipe also suggested that you could add raisins or nuts to the mix too if you wanted. But it did warn that the original recipe did not include any fat, so don't add any butter or oil to the mix, because the whole point of the recipe was to use up these crackers that otherwise would go to waste. But I think we can all agree that no matter how many eggs and raisins you add to this mix, it probably still won't taste good. People also figured out that if they ground the crackers up into a powder and mixed that into other recipes, it could help stretch the food that they had on hand. But I guess it also helped to have a little bit of an adventurous palate. As the Cold War continued and tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union grew, the government began to stockpile more and more of these crackers to be used in the event of a nuclear attack. By the end of the 1970s, the government had stockpiled over 2.3 billion of these packages. But thankfully, the Cold War ended, and those crackers never had to be used, and most of them were destroyed. However, some people who lived in fallout shelter areas reported that even years after the official distribution of these crackers had ended, they were still finding them in their fallout shelter long into the 1980s. So if you ever do find a box of these crackers in your home, be sure to take a picture and share it with us on social media. And if you want to learn more about food history, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more videos like this one. And if you really want to help us grow, go ahead and drop us a like and a comment down below. We love reading your comments. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. When we think of Jell-O molds, we think of wobbly, jiggly desserts, often brightly colored and sometimes with fruit at the bottom. But in the 1950s and 60s, gelatin salads were all the rage, and by that I mean salads made of gelatin. These futuristic-looking concoctions were proudly displayed at parties and in the windows of TV dinners. They were even served at the White House, and yes, they usually contained vegetables, but sometimes meat or even canned tuna. During the atomic age, it was common for food manufacturers to market their products as being as modern and exciting as nuclear science. Atomic gelatin molds were brightly colored, often in primary colors, and sometimes even fluorescent. They were a symbol of the space age and the exciting possibilities of modern science. One cookbook author even described them as being fun to eat. Fun to eat. But how exactly did one make such a creation? Well, it started with the gelatin. You could use any flavor, but some popular choices included lime, pistachio, and orange. The molds themselves came in a variety of shapes and sizes, from simple squares and circles to more elaborate designs like flowers and even planets. Once the gelatin was prepared according to the package instructions, it was poured into the mold and then allowed to set up in the refrigerator. The fun part was adding the decorations. Small pieces of vegetables like carrots, celery, and onions were often used, as well as chopped nuts and seeds. For a more elaborate design, you could use fruits like bananas, oranges, and grapefruit. And for the truly adventurous, there was always canned tuna. The possibilities were endless. One particularly enthusiastic cookbook author suggested that you could even make a gelatin sculpture. Just let the first layer set up completely and then carefully peel away the sides of the mold to reveal your masterpiece. Of course, this was not without its challenges. One woman wrote in to complain about the difficulty of removing the mold from the sides of her gelatin sculpture. But the author remained optimistic. With a little patience and care, she said, you can create works of art. Atomic gelatin molds may seem like a strange and unusual part of our culinary history, but they were a reflection of the times in which they were made. They were an era when science and technology were celebrated and when the possibilities of the future seemed endless. In a way, they were a symbol of hope and optimism. A hope that one day we would all be eating our vegetables with the same enthusiasm as we were eating our Jell-O. Hey, would you like a drink? I'm a scientist and I'm going to make you an atomic party punch. It's a classic Cold War cocktail. Now, this is not your typical fruit punch. It's neon-colored and it glows under a black light. And it's spiked with ginger ale and sherbet, which makes it extra fizzy and a little bit sweet. The recipe comes from Trader Vic's, and I found it in an old copy of Bon Appetit from 1962. Now, the original recipe calls for 7 different kinds of alcohol, but I'm going to simplify that a little bit. We're going to use just 3 kinds of alcohol: vodka, gin, and rum. Now, these are clear spirits, so if we just mix them together, it's going to be clear as water. But we want this to be neon-colored, so we're going to need some food coloring. Neon colors were very popular in the 50s and 60s. You can get neon food coloring at most grocery stores. Or if you want your drinks to glow under a black light, there's a special kind of glow in the dark food coloring. It's a little bit more expensive, but totally worth it if you want to impress your friends. The recipe calls for 1 cup of fruit punch, 1 cup of ginger ale, and 1/2 cup of sherbet. I'm using a neon pink grapefruit sherbet, but you can use any flavor that you like. And then for the alcohol, it calls for 1/2 a cup of vodka, 1/4 a cup of gin, and 1/4 a cup of rum. Now, the first step is to combine the fruit punch and the ginger ale in a pitcher. Then add your alcohol of choice. If you're feeling crazy, you can add all 3 types of alcohol like I did, or you can just use 1 or 2. Then add your food coloring and stir it all together. The more food coloring that you add, the brighter the color is going to be. So start out with a little bit and then add more if you need to. Now, we're going to let this sit in the fridge for at least an hour so the flavors can mingle. But if you're in a hurry, you can serve it right away. To serve, just pour yourself a glass of Atomic Party Punch and enjoy. Now, if you really want to impress your guests, you can garnish your glass with a little umbrella and a tiny paper umbrella. Just make sure that you don't poke anyone in the eye. Atomic Party Punch is best served at a party with other fun drinks and delicious appetizers. It's a great way to start off a night of science-themed fun. I hope you enjoyed today's recipe. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe for more fun science and science-themed cocktails. This is my great-grandma's recipe for cabbage and hot dog casserole. This dish was cheap, filling, and easy to make with ration-style ingredients. It became a standby for families worried about stretching their food supplies during tough times. This recipe is so simple. Just cook some hot dogs, dice them up and mix them with shredded cabbage, some salt and pepper, and pour the mixture into a greased 9 by 13-inch baking dish. Then repeat the process and you're done. You can even make it ahead and freeze it for a quick meal. In fact, this dish was featured in a magazine in the 60s and 70s because it could be made ahead and held in a freezer, something that was very convenient for busy families or those without much storage. The original recipe also includes a step where you boil the cabbage to make it more tender, but we found that wasn't really necessary. So we just shred it raw, and it turns out great. Now, this recipe is really versatile. You can use different types of hot dogs like beef, pork, or chicken, and you can spice it up by adding things like mustard, relish, or diced onions. And if you don't have cabbage, you can use cauliflower or broccoli. So why don't you give this recipe a try and let us know what you think in the comments below. And while you're there, make sure to give this video a thumbs up for more great recipes from the past. Today, we're going to start off with a bang and make some history. This is a Cold War era recipe. It's quick, it's easy, and believe it or not, it was actually quite popular for a while. And if you don't believe me, there are still plenty of people online today claiming it to be one of their favorite childhood dishes. This dish is so simple. In fact, I'm almost afraid to even call it a recipe. It's basically just white bread or crackers topped with ketchup, canned mushrooms, and processed cheese slices. That's it. Oh, but we are going to make it better, because we're going to take our inspiration from an actual historical recipe and use fresh ingredients whenever possible. For the base, we'll use a nice hearty Italian bread. I like to cut mine into little squares like this. You can, of course, use whatever kind of bread you'd like. Whatever kind of bread you have on hand will do just fine. The original recipe calls for plain old ketchup, but we're going to kick it up a notch with a nice spicy brown mustard. And of course, we'll need some fresh mushrooms and some good old cheddar cheese. As I was saying, this dish is so simple that you really can't mess it up. Just take your bread, spread some mustard on top, then place a few slices of mushroom on top of that. Now we're going to pour a small amount of water in the pan on low heat. We just want to steam the mushrooms a little bit. This will make them softer and a lot more flavorful. After a minute or so of steaming, we'll place a slice of cheese on top of the mushrooms. Then all we have to do is wait for the cheese to melt. And just like that, we've done it. We've taken a boring old can of mushrooms and turned it into a gourmet pizza. Well, maybe not exactly pizza, but hey, it's cheesy, it's saucy, and it's definitely got that umami flavor that we all know and love from pizza. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Pizza without pepperoni is just an insult. But remember, this is a wartime recipe. People were just happy to have something to eat. If you really want to get fancy, you can even throw a slice of pepperoni on top. But honestly, I think this tastes pretty good just the way it is. I really hope you enjoyed this one. It's definitely a simple recipe, but it's quick, it's easy, and most of all, it's delicious. I really hope you enjoyed this one. Until next time, happy cooking. Today we're going to do a Cold War classic Vienna sausage stew out of a can. This is fallout shelter food. The whole idea here was that you could have an entire meal in one can, so you didn't need to open a lot of different things. It was just one pot or one can for your entire meal. So we got our Vienna sausages right here. We've got some diced tomatoes with green chilies, some potatoes, some carrots, and then we've got some water to kind of thin it out if it's too thick. And of course, salt and pepper to taste. And we're just going to kind of build our stew right on top of this. Now, Vienna sausages are basically just small hot dogs. So if you like hot dogs, you'll probably like Vienna sausages. They come in a variety of different flavors. You've got your beef, your chicken, your pork, and even sometimes turkey. But today, we're going with the classic beef Vienna sausage. So we're going to open up our can of Vienna sausages, and then we're just going to take a handful and throw them in our pot. Then we're going to open up our can of potatoes, and we're just going to take a handful of potatoes and throw them in there. And we're going to do the same thing with the carrots. We're just going to take a handful of carrots and throw them in there. And then we're going to take our tomatoes with green chilies, and we're just going to pour those in there as well. Now, if you like your stew a little bit thinner, you can add a little bit of water. I usually do not, because it's already kind of soupy from the juices of the Vienna sausages and the tomatoes. And then you just want to add a little bit of salt and pepper to taste. Now, if you're really worried about fallout, you could always store this in a jar. I wouldn't recommend it for long-term storage because of the acidity of the tomatoes. But if you wanted to, you certainly could. I personally like to keep mine in the can because it's easier to store and it lasts a little bit longer. So we're just going to stir all this together, and then we're going to put it on our little stove burner here, and we're just going to heat this up until it's boiling. Once it's boiling, we're just going to turn it off and we're ready to eat. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you need to use this, just open it up, heat it up, and eat it right out of the can. No need to transfer it to another pot. Of course, if you have a lot of people to feed, you may want to dump it into a larger pot and heat it up that way. But if it's just me, I'm eating right out of the can. So give this a try. Now, this is something that was issued by the government. It's not some commercialized version. This is the real deal, and it's surprisingly still edible after all these years. So let's take a closer look at what this is all about. Okay. So this is definitely not your typical bread. As you can see, it's kind of like a brick. It looks like something that would be used to build a house, but it is in fact something that would be used inside of a nuclear bunker. Now, this is part of the government's preparedness program from the 1960s. Back then, the government was really encouraging people to build fallout shelters in their backyards or basements. And if you had one of those, you could get certain supplies through the government. And this was one of them. This is officially called the Emergency Survival Loaf. And yes, they did make more than one. They actually made 24 of these bad boys. And it comes out to about 2 loaves per person per year. So let's take a look at the packaging here. It says, "Do not open until December 1965. Well, we definitely did that because this was found in a storage unit that was filled with a lot of other vintage items from the 1960s. So we're guessing this probably came from there. And it does say right here, this is a survival food item for use in an emergency. Following a nuclear attack, the primary objectives in surviving are shelter, food, water, and medical care. And it goes on to say, a fallout shelter should be constructed so that it will protect its occupants from the effects of nuclear fallout for a period of at least 20 years. That is quite a long time to be surviving in your shelter. So let's take a look at the actual loaf here. You have to admit it does look pretty good. It almost looks like a normal loaf of bread. But this is not your grandma's soft and squishy bread. It's actually very hard, as you can see right here. It's like rock hard. The official name for this is 1 dozen small loaf, emergency rations, 600 calorie. It was created by civil defense planners in the 1960s. And according to the government, each loaf contains the following: 24 ounces or 680 grams of flour, 13 ounces or 370 grams of fat, 10 ounces or 280 grams of sugar, and 3 ounces or 85 grams of powdered milk. Now, the directions are pretty simple. It says to remove one end of the wrapper, place the loaf in a 350-degree oven, and bake it for 30 minutes. It also says to moisten the bread with water or milk before eating. Now, I found several different versions of these online. Some of them are unopened, so they're going for as high as $500. Of course, the one that I have here has been opened, and it's not in the best shape, so I doubt that I would be able to get anywhere near that much money for it. Okay, food historians, I need your help with this one. So we all know that frozen dinners are a far cry from the idealized version of the future that was promised to us by, well, everybody. I mean, we were all promised flying cars and robot servants and freeze-dried meals that you just add water to, and bam, gourmet space food. But what went wrong? Well, in the early days of the Cold War, packaged trays of Salisbury steak, peas, and mashed potatoes were being marketed as a modern take on traditional comfort food. These were sold as futuristic space-age meals that could be cooked in their own juices. And it's easy to see why they were promoted as such. The idea is that the food is pre-packaged and ready to go, just like the rockets and satellites that were launched during that time period. This idea of modernity and efficiency was further enhanced by the sleek, minimalist packaging that was designed to evoke the space age. The trays themselves were often made of aluminum, which was a nod to the space program's use of the metal in rocket construction. And the food was presented in a way that emphasized its convenience and ease of preparation. No wonder these were promoted as meals for the modern age. But these so-called space-age meals were not without their critics. Some people felt that they were too expensive and that the novelty of eating something that came out of a box and into a microwave was wearing off pretty quickly, not to mention that the food was often bland and unappetizing, which didn't help matters. But hey, convenience, right? Just pop it in the microwave and bam, dinner is served, just like those astronauts do in the movies. Today, these retro space dinners are a fun and quirky piece of history that remind us of a time when frozen food was supposed to be the wave of the future. And hey, maybe one day it will be again. Maybe one day we'll have that robot servant to heat up our dinners for us. Until then, though, we can enjoy the convenience of modern technology while we wait for the future to catch up to us. Speaking of catching up, I am so behind on my email that I don't even know where to start. Oh wait, I do. How about that essay you wrote for me last month? It's due tomorrow. Did you forget? Well, if you turn it in late, you're gonna get a late penalty. Oh wait, you already turned it in. Perfect. Let's check it over. Today's disgusting food combination, mayonnaise Jell-O salad. I don't even know how something can be both so gross and so sophisticated at the same time. But this recipe was, in fact, published in women's magazines in the 1950s and 60s as an elegant dish. Can you imagine? Now, normally, when you make Jell-O salad, you're combining cooked vegetables and/or fruit with a box of gelatin, and then you let it set up in the refrigerator to make this wobbly, jiggly mold of deliciousness. This recipe is similar, except for the fact that you're using mayonnaise. And I mean a lot of mayonnaise. The recipe calls for 1 and 2 tablespoons of lime or lemon gelatin. Now, if you've ever made Jell-O salad before, you know that this is not nearly enough gelatin to set up properly. But then again, this recipe also calls for a whole cup of mayonnaise. So I guess that explains it. But wait, there's more. You're also going to need half a cup of chopped celery, half a cup of chopped onion, a fourth of a cup of chopped green pepper, and 1 2 cups of shredded carrots. That sounds pretty good, right? Well, just wait until you see what else we have to add to this concoction. We're gonna take 2 cans of chicken, 1 can of tuna, 1 can of salmon, and 1 can of apricots. We're gonna mix all of that together, pour it into a mold, let it set up, and then serve it to your unsuspecting guests. This dish was often served with a garnish of chopped walnuts and a dollop of sour cream. Sour cream. Why? I don't know. I guess because it adds a nice tangy flavor that really complements the taste of mayonnaise. I'm just kidding. It probably just makes the whole thing look a little less gross. This recipe is from a time when it was fashionable for women to serve Jell-O molds at parties. And I guess they just got tired of serving the same old thing over and over again. So they started experimenting with different ingredients to create new and exciting flavor combinations. As a result, we have this, a strange, jiggly mass of questionable taste and texture that somehow was considered sophisticated. I think it's safe to say that this dish is no longer on the menu at fancy restaurants. Thank goodness. But if you're still curious about what it tastes like, well, I guess there's only one way to find out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever tried mayonnaise Jell-O salad? Would you ever try it? And what do you think it tastes like? This is the ultimate protein stretch, an old-school retro recipe that will make your meatloaf so moist it'll make your mama blush. And we're gonna do it again for the Super Bowl. This is peanut butter meatloaf. Now, some people are gonna be very nervous about this, but I promise you, if you like peanut butter, you will like this. I grew up eating this almost every Sunday growing up. Now, my mom, she was not a big spender when it came to meat. So she would always mix in all sorts of things into her ground beef to make it go further. This was back before the days of leaner ground beef, so you had all sorts of fat in there anyway. So adding peanut butter was not that big of a deal. It just gave it a lot of great flavor and juiciness. Today we're taking it to the next level with even more protein and even more flavor. We're going to be adding PB2, which is just dried out peanut butter. So it doesn't have any of the oil from the peanut butter, just the protein. So we're really boosting the protein up. And we're going to be using some natural peanut butter as well. We're going to mix it all together with our ground beef, and then we're going to form it into a loaf, and we're going to top it with some ketchup, and we're going to bake it in the oven. So let's get right to it. Let's start by combining our ingredients. 1 pound of ground beef, 1/4 cup of the natural peanut butter, 2 tablespoons of the PB2, and 1 egg to bind it all together. Get your hands in there and mix it all together until it's fully combined. Once you have even pieces, roll them out into logs and place them into a greased loaf pan. Now you want to roll them out a little bit bigger because as they bake, they're going to shrink up a little bit and you don't want it to be too full. You want it to have a little room to expand. Now we're going to top it with the remaining peanut butter and then we're going to spread some ketchup on top. Now my mom always used to make these really cool little cuts in the top of the meatloaf to keep it from splitting while it baked. So let's go ahead and do the same thing here. Now we're going to cover it with foil and we're going to bake it in a preheated oven to 350 degrees for an hour. After an hour, we're going to remove the foil and we're going to bake it for an additional 15 minutes to get it nice and brown on top. Now while it's baking, go ahead and mix up your favorite barbecue sauce, or you can use ketchup and brown sugar to make a glaze. We're going to brush that on top and we're going to let it bake for another 5 minutes. That's going to give us a nice caramelized sauce on top. And now we're ready to serve. Let's get this out of the pan and let's dig in. This is so good. The peanut butter adds so much flavor and juiciness to the meatloaf. And by adding the PB2, we're getting a ton of extra protein without adding any extra fat. It's a win-win. Now, if you're one of those people who is really nervous about mixing sweet things with savory things, I promise you, you're gonna love this. It's a perfect protein stretch for the Super Bowl. It's easy, it's cheap, and it's absolutely delicious. Hi, it's me from the Culinary Center. Today we are making powdered milk pudding, a Cold War dessert hack. During the Cold War, people were preparing for the worst, including the end of the world. Many families had bomb shelters either in their backyard or in the basement of their home. And in the event of a nuclear attack, they would descend into these shelters to ride out the nuclear blast and hopefully survive the fallout. One thing that people would bring down with them into these shelters was powdered milk. It was cheap, it was easy to store, and it lasted a very long time, so it was perfect for long-term storage. And after the initial shock of the blast, people would come up out of their shelters and find that the world as they knew it had changed. And so it was with these very simple ingredients that people would make something very special, something sweet to help them through these uncertain times. This is a real story that was handed down to me from my grandmother. She told me that when she was a child, her family would make this powdered milk pudding when they were in their bomb shelter. And it's a very simple recipe that starts with 2 cups of powdered milk. To that, you're going to add 1/2 cup of sugar. You can use any type of sugar you want, and then 1/4 teaspoon of salt. The salt really enhances the flavor of the milk and the sugar. You're going to mix this all together in a bowl, and then you're going to let it sit overnight. The next day, you'll notice that it has thickened. It's kind of like a custard, but really what it is reconstituted powdered milk. My grandmother told me that they would often make this the night before, and then they would take it down into the shelter with them so that by the next day, it would be ready to eat. This recipe is very versatile. You can make it savory by adding things like onion powder, garlic powder, different herbs and spices. Or you can make it really sweet by adding things like vanilla extract or even chocolate syrup. I'm going to make a batch of the sweet version, and I'm going to take it home, and I'm going to surprise my kids with this old Cold War dessert hack. Until then, keep calm and carry a whisk. When it comes to food, people are both fascinated and terrified of nuclear power. Just look at how many people were willing to eat the radioactive jelly beans in that first episode of Stranger Things. In the 1950s and 60s, the Cold War was raging, and everyone was a little bit afraid of nuclear war. But that didn't stop home bakers from embracing the whole atomic age thing. Some decorated their cakes with frosting patterns that looked like mushroom clouds. Others went all out and made an entire cityscape out of cake, complete with tiny little atomic bombs that you could pull to make it explode. Because nothing says celebration quite like a nuclear blast. There were even cake projectors that could project the image of a mushroom cloud onto your dessert table. And if you didn't want to project the image of the bomb itself, you could always opt for a more subtle design that just kind of looked like an atomic pattern. You know, for when you're feeling classy. Now, some folks took a different approach, and instead of trying to make their cakes look like bombs, they named their desserts after them. Like this Jell-O mold that was first described in a 1958 cookbook called Atomic Sweets. The instructions say to layer Jell-O in a mold, then add some fruit and nuts and let it set up. Then you turn it out onto a plate, and you have a perfectly formed little boy atomic bomb. Or you could make this a dessert that starts out as a lime Jell-O mold, but once it's unmolded, you take out the center section to make it look like a hollowed-out bomb. And if you don't want to get too literal about the whole nuclear theme, you could always go with something a little more abstract like this green Jell-O mold with a single cherry on top. It's just one small step for man, one giant leap for Jell-O kind. Now I know what you're thinking. Great. Who doesn't love a good radiation-themed dessert? But how do I make it myself? Well, luckily for you, one of our writers has put together a collection of recipes inspired by the atomic age. They're easy to follow, use simple ingredients, and will hopefully turn out looking just as good as the store-bought versions. Today we're going to try and recreate a Spam and pineapple casserole from World War II. This dish is also sometimes known as Hawaiian ambrosia, and as you can probably guess by the name alone, it's sweet, salty, a little bit spicy, and totally umami. It's definitely not diet food, but then again, neither was anyone's diet during the war. In fact, Spam was practically a household staple during this time. In 1945, more than 70% of all American families were eating it on a regular basis. The Victory Garden that I'm tending to in this video is planted in the exact center of what used to be a huge industrial farm complex here in California's Central Valley. These fields stretched as far as the eye could see and were planted in things like wheat, tomatoes, lettuce, and of course, potatoes. The massive harvest would then be shipped out to soldiers both here at home and overseas. When it comes to feeding the troops, there's no shortage of historians and food experts who will tell you that the quality and the portion sizes were often lacking. So it's no surprise that food manufacturers got involved. Companies like Hormel, who were already making a killing off of canned Spam, started to experiment with new recipes that could make their product taste a little bit more exciting. Enter the Spam and pineapple casserole. This recipe is said to have originated in Hawaii, where the sweet and salty flavors of the islands are already well known. We know that the people of Hawaii were already eating a lot of Spam during the war, but the addition of pineapple really does make this dish feel like a taste of the tropics. Let's get started. First, we'll need a 2-pound can of sliced Spam, 1 can of crushed pineapple, a half cup of brown sugar, a 1/4 cup of water, 2 tablespoons of butter, 1 egg yolk, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves. For the topping, we'll need a half cup of crushed pineapple, a half cup of chopped walnuts, and a 1/4 cup of shredded coconut. The first step is to drain the pineapple and then combine all of the ingredients except for the pineapple, the walnuts, and the coconut into a large bowl. And you'll want to mix it all together until it's nice and creamy. Once that's done, we'll pour the mixture into a greased 8x8 baking dish. Then we'll top it with the remaining pineapple, walnuts, and coconut. And now we're ready to bake. The casserole should be cooked at 350 degrees for approximately 20 minutes or until the topping is nice and brown. After that, we'll let it cool down for just a few minutes before serving. And that, my friends, is what a Spam and pineapple casserole from World War II tastes like. What do you think? Would you eat this stuff? Let me know in the comments below. Have you ever wondered what astronauts drink in space? Tang, tang, tang. It may not be what you'd expect. This breakfast drink was marketed as the space-age drink of the future. And even though it tasted like chemicals and glowed an eerie orange, it became a beloved part of many kitchens in the 1960s. Before we get started, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also, a special thanks to our supporters whose names you can see on screen right now. The year is 1957 and America is enamored with all things space. As the Soviet Union takes the lead in the space race, the U.S. government is determined to not only catch up, but to surpass them in every way possible. Part of this effort involves ensuring that American astronauts are given every advantage, including a special drink designed to keep them healthy and alert. Enter Tang, a freeze-dried orange drink mix that was not only delicious, but could also be kept in airtight containers for extended periods of time. The drink was a hit with astronauts and soon made its way to grocery stores across the country. But not everyone was thrilled about Tang's growing popularity. In the beginning, the drink's main selling point was that it was the same one consumed by astronauts. But as more and more people tried it, they began to wonder if it really tasted like chemicals and glowed an unnatural orange in the absence of sunlight. Despite these concerns, Tang continued to be a staple in many American households throughout the 1960s. In fact, it was so popular that people began to drink it for breakfast, which led to a whole new line of Tang products specifically marketed towards morning consumption. By the end of the decade, however, interest in space travel began to wane, and along with it, Tang's popularity. Still, it has managed to maintain a small but loyal following and can still be found in some supermarkets today. Now it's time to hear from you. Did you ever drink Tang? It is an iconic dish made with just 3 ingredients. It's cheap, it's easy to make, and it's filling. No wonder it's one of the most popular recipes in the world. This is the first in a series about the most frugal meals. First up, tuna noodle casserole. When I think of all the classic comfort food dishes, this one is at the top of my list. The first time I ever ate it was at a shelter many years ago. I was staying in a shelter. There were 2 main soups we ate every day, tomato and this, a tuna noodle casserole. It brought me back to that time in my life when my stomach was always rumbling and I never knew where my next meal would come from. This dish is so synonymous with poverty and desperation that some call it poor people's lasagna. But don't let that fool you. This dish can feed a family of 4 for just over $1 a serving, and that's with the good quality stuff. If you use cheaper ingredients, the price per serving goes down even more. Our recipe today is built almost entirely from pantry staples: canned tuna, condensed soup, and noodles. Most of the time, the noodles are egg noodles, but really any kind will do. I like to use whatever I have on hand. As for the soup, sometimes we use a can of chicken noodle soup or a can of cream of mushroom soup. Sometimes we use a can of tomato soup or a can of cream of celery soup. Really? You can use any soup you want. Just 10.7 ounces or 300 grams of soup. That's all you need. Oh, and don't forget the tuna. 2 5-ounce cans of tuna, drained and flaked. That's 280 grams of protein. Now let's talk about how to make this. You can cook the noodles according to the package directions and then combine everything in a big bowl. Or you can do what I do. I combine everything in a big pot. Then I add water and I bring it to a boil. Once it's boiling, I reduce the heat and I simmer it until the noodles are tender. And that's it. That's all you have to do. Some people like to add frozen peas or corn. Some people like to add a can of diced tomatoes. Some people like to season it with black pepper or red pepper flakes. Go crazy. Add whatever you want. For me, the beauty of this dish is in its simplicity. A bowl of hot water, some noodles, a can of soup, some tuna, and a little bit of salt. That's a complete meal. That's a 4 out of 5 on the filling-o-meter.